Okay, so we're going to continue on with the project in section 1.5. This is a really important section in the sense that if you're new to programming, if you're new to writing, instructions for a computer to do, this is going to be a really new concept, okay? And we're going to talk about loops, which a loop is just something that instructs the computer to do a repeated calculation. And that's sort of what makes computers nice, is that they'll do all the hard work for us, right? And so what we're going to do is, this is a loop, and this loop is going to perform some set of instructions repeatedly, okay? So we're going to enter this directly into the R console, and this is a very bad way of doing it, by the way, but we're just going to enter it into the R console directly, just to show the basic idea behind a loop, okay? First line says x is going to be assigned the value 1, and this is called initializing a variable, where we're just going to say, I'm going to use this variable x, so I'm just going to toss in the value 1 just to hold its place, basically, okay? So there we go, we've initialized the value x. We'll initialize the value I. Now we type in while I is less than 100. Okay, now this while function is still waiting for more instructions. So notice this plus here, it's saying, hey, when you typed this in, you didn't give me everything that I needed. So we're going to open up a brace, x I is going to be assigned I plus 5. It's still giving us pluses, so it's still waiting for more information, okay? I is going to be assigned I plus 1, and then close that brace. Now once we close that brace, notice that it no longer gave us pluses. It says, okay, I now have everything that I needed for this while function, and your code can now continue. You can now enter in whatever you want, and I've got everything I need for that while function, okay? Alright. So once again, R hasn't really done anything. It hasn't given us an error or anything like that. That says it executed correctly, okay? So let's see what R has done. Let's type X in here, and you'll notice that it gave us this list of values. So whenever we typed this stuff in, this is the list of values that it produced, okay? So let's dissect this loop a little bit and get an idea of how loops work and the interpretation of all the pieces that go into them. So first of all, we're going to initialize variables, which just says, hey, I'm going to use these variables, please toss some data in there to hold the place of those variables, okay? While is a keyword that starts a loop, and so I, you'll notice, is going to start at 1, and it says while I is less than 100, and then these braces here say perform these steps. So as long as I is less than 100, R is going to perform these steps, okay? Since I starts at 1, the while loop says, oh look, I is 1, which is less than 100, so I'm going to perform the steps. So x1, which means the first value in the vector x, is going to be assigned I plus 5. So x1 is going to be assigned 1 plus 5, which is 6. I then gets replaced by I plus 1, which is 2. And then it's done with those steps. After it completes that step, it goes back to the while function. It says, is I still less than 100? I is 2, which is less than 100. So since I is still less than 100, we're going to do those steps again. So x2 is going to be assigned 2 plus 5. So x2 then is 2 plus 5, which is 7. It then increases I by 1 again, and it's done with those steps. So we go back to the while function, and it says I is now 3, because 2 was replaced by 3. I is now 3, which is still less than 100, so perform these steps. So x3 is going to get replaced by 3 plus 5, so x3 is 8. Okay? And it just repeats these steps until it reaches I equal to 99. So if I is 99, 99 plus 1 gets fed into I. It then goes back to the while function and it says, is I, which is now 100, less than 100? And since 100 is not less than 100, this condition is broken. And so once I reaches 99, the next I value is 100, and at that point the loop says, okay, I've reached that condition where it's no longer satisfied, so I'm going to stop. Okay? So this is the 96th item, this is the 97th item, this is the 98th item, this is then the 99th item. And there's no 100th item, because once you reach that 99th item, when I is 99, I jumps by 1 position to the 100th position, and while says I is now 100, which is not less than 100, so I'm going to stop. Okay? So that's the idea behind a loop. Okay. A very, very important thing to keep in mind is that oftentimes you'll write a loop incorrectly. And so suppose that we did that same loop. X is going to be assigned 1 to start. I is going to be assigned 1 to start. While I less than 100, we open up the brace, we say the ith item in the list X is going to be I plus 5. And then let's suppose that we forget this line here, so that I is no longer going to jump ahead to the next largest number. It'll just stay at 1. Okay? If we forget that, I is not increasing. And so what happens is you never reach the point where I is equal to 100, so that while loop never breaks. And you'll notice that the computer's still thinking, still thinking, still thinking. And it's because it's trying to run this while loop, but the I is not increasing by 1, and so it never reaches that condition that tells it to stop. So this is a very common thing, and you didn't break anything. It's just you have to stop it from doing that loop, right? So you just hit that stop button, and then it breaks out of that loop. Okay? So that's how you get out of an infinite loop. Okay. Now, what we're going to do is usually we'll enter this into what's called a script prompt. Okay. So this is very important because I mentioned that typing stuff into the R prompt is a very, very bad way of writing, because here we typed in all these steps and we made a mistake. So if you make a single mistake, you then have to go retype all that stuff. So you don't want to type stuff directly into the prompt. You want to type it into a script editor like this. Okay? So let's type the code that's shown here. X is going to be assigned 1. And then it jumps to the next page here. I is going to be assigned 1. While I is less than 100, open up the brace. Xi is going to be assigned I plus 5. I is assigned I plus 1, which means I is going to increase from I to the value that comes after I. So if I is 5, that increases you up to 6. Okay? And close the brace. Now what you'll do, this is very important, hit Control A, or you could just select it all with the mouse, but select everything. And now, very important, Control R. Okay. After you hit Control R, it takes all of these commands and deposits them into the prompt. And now let's type in X and see what we get. We get the same list back. So it computed all those steps just like before, but we typed them in here. Okay. Now the benefit to typing them in here is, suppose that we did make that mistake, and suppose that we left off that I plus 1. Okay. So we hit Control A to select all of our steps, and Control R feeds them into the prompt. Alright, now, oh no, we made a mistake. It's in an infinite loop. So how do we get out of it? Hit the stop button. Okay. And now, instead of having to retype all these steps like you would have to if you typed them in here, you just go into your code here and you say, what was the mistake I made? Oh, I forgot to iterate I by 1. So you type that line in, and now you're good to go. Select it all, Control R, and you're done. X now has that list of data. Okay? So to get to this prompt, to get to this script console, you go File, New Script. File, New Script, and that opens this window. Okay? Alright. So let's go ahead and try something else, and let's enter in, I'm just going to delete all that. So let's type in this new set of code here. X is going to be assigned 1. I is going to be assigned 1. While I is less than 100, we're going to perform these steps. Okay. And I don't know if I've made any mistakes here, but it doesn't really matter, because if I did, I can just correct it. Select it all, Control R, and it pastes everything into the console. It didn't give me any mistakes, didn't give me any errors, so that says everything's probably fine, right? Okay. Now it says enter X into the prompt. And what has it done? Well, that's going to be your job, is interpret what these lines did that gave us these values in the list X. Okay? Same thing here. Type these commands into the console, or not into the console, but into the script prompt. And again, I'm going to just one more time. You go File, New Script. Type everything in there. Hit Control A, Control R. Now in this case I just typed random garbage, gave me an error, so in that case I'd go back in here, correct my mistakes. Okay? Alright, so run through that code, interpret the results. Okay? And now let's run through an actual example. Okay? So we're going to download the Dow Jones data from my etudes, which, let me see. Okay, etudes is open. So go into the Resources tab. Okay. You would download table.csv. So click that. I've already downloaded it. So it's okay, we'd go into Downloads. There's our data, so we'd cut it, right? C/R, that's where our That's where our folder is that we're using, C:/R, and then I'm just going to paste it in here. The file's already in here, so it's giving me this warning that, hey, the file's already there. I'm just going to replace it. Okay, so there we go. We now have the data loaded into the proper folder. And now, what we're going to do is we're going to rename this to be a little bit more clear. Okay, we're going to rename it Dow Table, because it's the Dow Jones Industrial Average. So the file's selected. I'm just going to click once, and that brings up the file name. So rename it as Dow Table, just to make it a little more informative of a name. Okay. Alright, so here we go. We're going to load this data into stock.history through R. Okay. So we're going to do stock.history is assigned read.table C:/R dowtable.csv, comma, space, sep equals, comma, header equals true. I'm going to type everything exactly the way I see it, and if you don't type it that way, you'll probably get a mistake. Okay, so it has now loaded all that data into stock history. Let's assign a new variable to hold just the closing price, the price at the end of each day. Okay, so we'll do close.price, make sure it's exactly matching what you see here, is assigned stock.history. And what this does, it says all rows but only the fifth column. Okay. Alright, so now we've selected just the fifth column of data, which is the closing price, the price at the end of the day. Now, the closing price changes from day to day, and maybe we want to calculate the daily difference, the change from day to day. Then there's tons of data in here, tons of days, and so to do that, we don't want to do it by hand. We want to have R do it for us. And so we're going to write a loop that does that for us, okay? So new script, and this is the loop that's going to produce the daily change in price, okay? So we're going to introduce a new variable called daily.difference and initialize it with the value of 1. Make sure everything is perfect. Alright, so we're going to type all this stuff in. We're going to make sure it's all perfect, right? So here's our script prompt. Daily.difference is going to be assigned 1. I is going to be assigned 1. And then type all the rest of this stuff in. Okay, so I think everything's typed in correctly. Just a quick scan, see if I see anything out of place. Capital I where there shouldn't be one, a period out of place, a misspelling, and it looks like everything's okay. So I'll do Control A, Control R. Okay, so it took a little bit because there's a lot of data, but eventually it reproduced that line that says, I didn't see any errors, and you're ready to type more commands. Okay, so let's type in daily.difference, and that gives us the calculation that we just now did. This tells us the change from one day to the next. So on this day, the market changed by 3.28 points. Scroll up higher to more recent times, and here the market changed by minus 168 points from the previous day. Okay? So, record a few of those values, interpret what it was that happened, okay? And now go ahead and practice that by entering this code. And that's going to tell you the percentage change that the market experienced from one day to the next, okay? And so that's all done with loops, where it calculates those things piece by piece. And you no longer have to do any of that by hand. You just have R do it for you, okay? Alright, so that's the end of chapter 1.